It is That's Enough Out of You podcast. I am your host, Bill Rader, and my co-host is with me also, and that is Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going?
Billy Raids, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. Sean, this is an episode I've been looking forward to since we started talking about doing this podcast, so I'm really excited here.
Oh, I know, buddy. This is going to be a good one tonight. But before we get into that, Billy, just want to tell all our listeners out there, we appreciate the feedback. The downloads are coming in. Feedback is coming in. It's just crazy, buddy. And if anybody could, help us on Patreon, that'd be great. Our website is up. We're getting a lot of views on our website. It's just been tremendous, buddy. And, we just want to keep expanding. So anybody on our social media pages, when you see me promoting the post and promoting an episode, promoting an article on the website, share that post, tell your friends about us. And we just want to keep expanding, buddy, because I think, I'm really proud of the work we're doing here, buddy. We're doing some great things. And it's just, the guests we've had have been tremendous, and the listeners have just been awesome. And it's just been so great, Billy. It's been great.
And again, our website is that'senoughoutofyou.com. Just That's Enough Out of You. There's no punctuation or anything. Just go to that'senoughoutofyou.com. All of our information is there. It'll take you to our Patreon. It'll take you to the podcast. There's blogs that Sean has written. There's just a ton of good information on there about the show. So I really recommend you going to our website. It's and there's going to be more to come. I mean, it's basically, we just put it out there. So there's going to be a lot more to it. We just needed to get a website out there, and we got it. So I would go and take a look and let us know what you think. There's comments section, everything. So.
And Billy, I got an article up there on Marilyn Monroe, and right now that article is doing the best out of all of them. It's just been tremendous. The McGovern episode is out right now, and he talked about the truth about Marilyn Monroe, and it's just doing. The first day was unbelievable with downloads and comments, and I mean, it's just great, buddy, to get that truth out there and to, expose people like Gianni Russo, buddy. It just makes it feel good.
Yeah. Anytime we can make fun of Gianni Russo, show him for what he actually is. All right.
God bless Clemenza, buddy. That was my favorite scene at the end. Hello, Carlo.
When Carlo gets
garroted, yeah.
And then Michael Corleone walks by. Excellent. Well, all right. Speaking of mafia, we got a big one, Billy. Oh, this is a big one, Sean. I'm giddy. I'm so excited.
I know you've been waiting on this forever, Billy. So set us up, buddy. Tell us what we're talking. Tell the people what we're talking about.
So today, this episode, we're going to focus on the Gambino crime family, specifically the hit on Paul Castellano. We're going to talk about what led up to it. We're going to talk about the hit itself. We're going to talk a little bit about the aftermath. Then, of course, we're going to get into the HBO movie, Gotti, which was the better movie.
One of the best mob movies of all time, in my opinion.
Absolutely. There's also the book Goombahs, which I read a long time ago. I barely remember reading it, but and then there's also Sammy the Bull has a podcast, so we'll get into a little bit of that stuff. But so that's our topic, and let's just get into it.
All right, Billy, let's get started here, pal.
All right.
So December 16th, 1985, the week before Christmas, John Miller, the famous crime author, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Billy, right?
Yes, of course.
I think he's on CNN now, maybe MSNBC. So anyway, he's sitting in there in the press office there, John Miller. At this point, he's a young, up-and-coming reporter still. And here's something come over the wire that there's been a shooting right down in Midtown. And there's bodies laying in the street. And they said that the car looks like it has diplomatic plates, and it could be an act of terrorism. So John Miller grabs a film crew, and they rush down to the scene. And he takes one look at the body laying in the street. And he said, "That's no diplomat. That's Big Paulie Castellano, the boss of the Gambino crime family."
Yeah. So
then a law enforcement official that John got information from before takes him on the side, and he says, "John, I'm gonna tell you who we think's behind this." And he mispronounced his name. He said his name is Gotti. And John Miller said, Gotti, who the hell is Gotti? Well, wouldn't be very long after that, Bill, where they got his name right, and the whole world knew who the name John Gotti was.
Right.
And, he was the gangster from the movies, Bill, that kind of walked into real life, because we're so accustomed to these guys like Carlo Gambino and Russell Buffalino and Tony Accardo that try to go in the opposite direction of, the cameras. They don't want any exposure. They're trying to pretend they're honest businessman in a candy store, whatever, modest living, this and that. And Gotti was the guy that came right out, fancy suits, walked right into the camera and basically said, yeah, I'm a gangster. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And he was like the gangster from the movies, buddy.
Yeah. And you mentioned Carlo Gambino. So the crime family is the Gambino crime family, and obviously named after Gambino. And he was really one of these mustache Pete type of gangsters. He was one of the original gangsters. It's his family. And I think, Sean, we'll get into his.
Well, yeah, let's start there, Billy. So you had the 5 families make up the commission. You had the Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo.
Right.
And the Gambinos and the Genovese family have always been the two that have been the most powerful, throughout history. But the Carlo Gambino built that up into an absolute powerhouse. And, what happens is, towards the end of his life, when he's getting really ill, he has to name a successor, and he names his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, born Constantino Paul Castellano. He names him the boss in October 1976. Now, Bill.
Well, he names him successor.
He names him the successor, yes.
Right.
The problem is, Bill, there was a guy by the name of Vanilli Della Croce, who was Mr. Neal, they called him.
Right.
And Della Croce was the guy that really was in line to be the boss.
He was the underboss, right?
He was the underboss, yes. And he worked his way up. I think he started as a driver for Albert Anastasia. Della Croce was a gangster through and through, and he was next in line. And a lot of the guys on the street respected Della Croce, where they didn't respect Castellano. So Gambino putting in putting in Castellano instead of Della Croce really causes a rift in the family. And when Castellano takes over, he's got his hands full, Bill. He's got his hands full. So the Gambinos, we're going to talk a lot about the Westies and Roy DeMeo, but we're not going to go into too many details on them, because to me, that's a separate show, Bill. Because those guys were so violent.
Yeah.
That we got to talk about them in a separate show.
Right.
But basically, Westies were the Irish mob in Hell's Kitchen. And, Hell's Kitchen got the name legendary. The legend was that they got the name from a beat cop that was on the streets there. And he said, this place is worse than the hottest section of hell. And the Westies were as bad as it gets. I mean, they were just, between them and the DeMeo crew, they were disposing of bodies, dismembering bodies, killing people left and right. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And DeMeo was a soldier, Bill, but he had his own crew, and none of his crew was made. But he made a lot of money for Castellano and the Gambinos. And then you also had what's called the Zips, which was a group of Sicilian gangsters that their loyalty was to the Sicilian mob in Sicily. But they worked with the Gambinos. And you also had the Cherry Hill Gambinos, which were involved heavily in the heroin. And then you had the Gotti crew, Bill. And the Gotti crew was up and coming, a lot of young Turks, and they were making a lot of money. A lot of these guys were making a lot of money with drugs. And Castellano put a rule in, deal drugs and you die. But the rule, Bill, it was really, it wasn't that don't do drugs. It was really don't get caught.
Don't get caught, yeah.
Because DeMeo had a huge drug business, the Westies, the Cherry Hill Gambinos, and they were all kicking money to Paul. He didn't care where the money was, as long as the envelope wasn't light.
Right. And just to put it into perspective, Sean, I mean, there were 24 crews that essentially reported into Castellano. It was a big family.
Well, it was the largest probably the largest in the country, Bill.
Right. And Castellano was considered they called the capo de tutti capo, right?
The boss of all bosses. Yeah.
He was the essentially the chairman of the board, the chairman of the crime commission.
But that was basically just because he took over from Carlo Gambino. I mean, Carlo Gambino was the boss of all bosses, you know, and it wasn't that the other bosses respected Castellano.
No, in fact, they didn't respect him, and most of his crews didn't really respect him, and they wanted Della Croce to be the boss, and then the line of succession, and we talked about this, Sean, the line of succession probably would have gone Della Croce and then Frankie DiCico, who was...
Yeah, and we'll talk about DiCico. He was an up-and-coming, he was a captain, but really powerful, up-and-coming young gangster. But honestly, Bill, like the crews that Castellano were loyal to Castellano was really Tommy Bellotti was a loan shark.
Right.
Nino Gaggi was the capo that handled Roy DeMeo. And DeMeo, as a soldier, he was one of the few that have access to Castellano, and they were really the only crews that really were loyal. There was another Jimmy Brown, Faila was another crew that was loyal, but you'll see what happens with his crew. They'll turn. And DiCico at one point was loyal, but you'll see what happens with them. And the problem with Castellano, Bill, is he distanced himself from the street.
Yeah. So
he stopped going to the social clubs. And he had his house, which they nicknamed the White House, you know, because it was just massive and it looked like the White House. And he would have his captains come to see him at the White House, and he wouldn't go to the clubhouses to meet the other guys, and he got disconnected from the streets.
Right.
And DeMeo was one of the few soldiers that would be allowed to go to Castellano's house to meet with him. You know, so that was the problem right there, Billy, is where he really gets into problems where, you know, he's just not connected to the street. He wants to be a businessman.
Well, that was the thing. That was why so many of these guys didn't respect him, because he treated it more like a business rather than a criminal syndicate, which is what they had been for many, many years. These are guys who made a living off of hijacking trucks and, you know, the unions and porn and all that kind of stuff. And this guy was more of he wanted to hang out with the guys from Wall Street. He wanted to be a CEO rather than a mob boss.
He did, but Bill, don't pretend that he wasn't capable of violence, because
absolutely.
There was a situation with his former son-in-law, Frank Amato, when he divorced his daughter, Castellano's daughter, and he found out that, you know, Amato was abusive to his daughter and he was cheating on his daughter through the whole marriage. Well, he ordered Roy DeMeo to kill him and dismember him. And they cut him up and they threw the body parts in the East River. So it's not like Castellano was, you know, normal businessman. He was a gangster, but he did like that side of, you know, dealing with the white collar situations and stuff like that, rather than being too involved to the street. You know what I mean, buddy?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then, you know, do you want to get into his legal troubles now, Sean, or how do you want to?
Well, let's get into that, Bill. So his legal troubles start really like in 1983, Bill. The FBI installs listening devices in his house, in the White House.
And that story is a great story. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you know the story, Sean, but
yeah, you want to tell him, Billy?
Yeah. So the FBI had been trying to figure out how they could bug this house, how they could get into the house, because there was a lot of security. It wasn't like they could just, you know, walk up to the jump, you know, hop in a window like they did. If you remember in the Sopranos, they just kind of drove up the driveway and jimmied the door open and got into the house. This was a house that had guard dogs, it had fences. It literally was like trying to get into the White House in Washington. It was impossible. And so what they did was they found a way to make it so that his cable television would go in and out. It would disconnect, and they figured out how to mess with his cable. So he called the cable company. Well, they intercepted the call to the cable company. The FBI did. and they dressed up an undercover agent like the cable guy and sent him into the house. And I guess it was Tommy Bilotti who was there also. Tommy Bilotti basically let this guy in and said, yeah, I'll show you where it is. So what they did was what the FBI guy did was he told Castellano, well, I have to install something in your kitchen in order to fix the problem. So Castellano said, yeah, all right, go ahead. He's Tommy, you watch him. So Bilotti's watching this guy literally as he's installing a microphone in Castellano's kitchen.
Right.
And Bilotti has no idea what he's doing, but he fixed the cable. So they actually turned the cable back on. So Castellano had his cable TV again. He could watch his news programs. And now the FBI could hear absolutely everything that was going on because he actually did most of his business in the kitchen. And they found that out, Sean, by talking to his housekeeper.
Right.
His housekeeper, who was also his
mistress.
His mistress. They found out a lot of stuff by talking to her. In fact, she told Castellano they were asking her questions, and he would say to her, "Go ahead, answer the questions. Don't lie to them. Do it."
Right.
And so she would, but yeah, it was really just a crazy story. They pretended to be the cable company, went in, installed the bug, and walked out.
And now that bug, Bill, really picked up a lot of stuff because, like you said, Castellano was doing all his business there in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the other bosses of the other 5 families, like Tony Ducks Corallo or the Lucchese family. And Bill, you got to give these guys a little bit of credit for these nicknames. Like he got the name Ducks because he was always ducking indictments. So, so Castellano, he's slamming Tony Ducks behind his back, talking about him. He's talking about Fat Tony Salerno, it's kind of the front boss of the Genovese family. The Chin Gigante was the actual boss, and he's slamming actually both of them guys. He's Castellano's talking about. So, and he's talking a lot of business, Bill. And what happens is DeMayo's going crazy. DeMayo's running a stolen car parts scheme. And they're sending car parts over to Kuwait. They have this whole big scheme going on, Bill. And he gets tied up in an investigation. Bodies are disappearing between DeMayo and the Westies. They're killing people left and right, Bill. I mean, the crazy Westies are running around, walking in bars with guys' heads. I mean, can you imagine sitting at a bar, Bill, and a guy walks in with carrying a guy's head?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just madness. Like he totally lost control. But what happens is Castellano becomes afraid that DeMayo is going to rat him out in this investigation. So Castellano orders DeMayo hit. And to me, this is the important thing. This is one of the biggest mistakes that Paul made as boss. And he made a lot of them. But this is like, the one guy that everybody, and I don't want to say afraid, Bill, because these guys are gangsters. They're not really afraid of anything, but everybody's leery. Let's use the word leery of Roy DeMayo because he's a serial killer, Bill.
Yeah.
And the bugs pick up. Now, what happens is they're bugging Castellano's house, but they're also bugging one of John Gotti's guys, Angelo Quack Quack Ruggiero, and he gets the name Quack Quack because he never shut up.
Right.
And what happened was he was doing business, Bill, on his daughter's landline phone. Okay, because he didn't think the FBI would bug that. So he's talking all kind of business on his daughter's phone. The FBI finds out about that. They bug that phone, and they pick up a lot of interesting stuff. They pick up conversations between Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, John's brother, which leads to an investigation into those two dealing heroin. Okay, and it also picks up those two bashing and laughing about Castellano, like they have no respect for him, laughing about the housekeeper and stuff. And they also pick up about Castellano ordering to hit on Roy DeMayo, and Ruggiero and Gene Gotti are talking, Bill, and they want no part of this contract. John Gotti wants nothing to do with Roy DeMayo.
Right.
And he makes that clear to his guys, like, nah, Paul can handle that. We're not getting involved in that. And Frank DiCico, who we talked about as a rising captain, Castellano gives the contract to him, and he wants no part of that.
Right.
He keeps telling we can't find him. I mean, everybody knows where Roy DeMeo was at the Gemini Lounge where he hung out. He was there constantly, and he's telling Castellano he can't find him because they wanted no part of that contract bill. And eventually there was really only a couple of groups that were crazy enough to take out DeMeo. The Westies would have been one. The Sicilian Zips would have been another. But I think it was finally DeMeo's own crew that took him out. And when DeMeo gets whacked, it's almost like, Bill, you have all these wolves are circling the White House there, waiting to attack Castellano, but you have the one big bad wolf, DeMeo, that nobody wants to deal with. And Castellano takes him out. Now it's like the only guy that's protecting you, really, besides Neely Della Croce, is you take him out. And the thing is, at this point, Della Croce is trying to keep the peace, Bill, because he understood when Castellano became boss, he could have started a war right there.
Right.
And he didn't, Bill, because he's a gangster through and through.
Well, his expression that he always said is the boss is the boss is the boss.
Right.
And he admonished. So he was a mentor to John Gotti, and he admonished Marty.
He was, yes.
He admonished John Gotti because Gotti would talk about Castellano. He would say your boss, and he would say things like that. And Della Croce would get in his face and say, look, he's your boss too, and you need to respect that. And even if you don't respect him, you need to respect that he's the boss. And I think what was when Gotti and his crew got into trouble with Quack and his brother, Gotti's brother, got in trouble for heroin. Castellano was going to kill them, and Della Croce kind of stepped in and said, "Yeah, I'll take care of it. Don't." And he protected Gotti and his crew, and he went to see Gotti and said to him, he said, "Listen, if things had gone the other way, if Castellano didn't listen to me and didn't care what I had to say, I would have come here today with two zips.
The two zips, yeah.
And that
would have been it.
And you would be gone." And so he really was Cosa Nostra through and through. He was a guy who
really believed it.
He followed the rules.
Right.
He was also sick. He was dying. He was dying of brain cancer. This was another thing that was going on because the FBI bugged Della Croce's house. They actually put a bug under his deathbed.
Right.
When Gotti and some of the other guys would go to talk to him while he was dying, the FBI was listening to everything that they said. Where do you want to go from here, Sean?
Well, let's keep going, Bill. So Castellano's legal troubles really start to build. In Ruggiero, what happens is Ruggiero and Gene Gotti end up getting arrested for dealing heroin.
Yep. Based
on these bugs. And also what happens is the commission trial's going on. The investigation into the commission. So they're after the five bosses of the crime families. And Castellano gets wrapped up into that, and he actually gets photographed leaving a meeting with them. And that investigation is ramping up. Yeah. And the thing is, the tapes that were made of Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti become really important here because Castellano wants to hear those tapes. He's trying to get it from his lawyer. He wants to know what's on those tapes. And John Gotti's smart enough. His street sense knows that Castellano hears those tapes where Ruggiero and Gene Gotti are laughing at Castellano, talking totally disrespectful about him, and also implicating him in drugs. It's like, the thing is, Bill, is like Castellano made this big beef about drugs. Yeah. Like, don't do drugs, but he's getting money from everywhere. It reminds me that episode in Sopranos, Bill, with Lou DiMaggio.
Right.
Where his boss told him, stay out of drugs. And then DiMaggio finds out that, his boss was making a living off of drug dealers, working with other drug dealers.
Right.
And Castellano this whole time was getting money from drugs. So he's got major problems, Bill. And the Young Turks are really at the door now. And DeMeo's not there to protect Castellano anymore because he got rid of him.
Right. And that was another place where Della Croce kind of stepped in because he knew that he had so Gotti's lawyer, Bruce Cutler, had the tapes.
Right.
And Della Croce kept, Castellano would go to Della Croce and say, you got to get me those tapes. I want to hear what's on those tapes. And Della Croce kind of put him off and said, all right, we'll get you the tapes, but not right now. And things are happening. We can't do it right now. And one of the things that they were talking about on those tapes, Sean, and I know we were thinking whether or not we should bring this up.
Yeah, bring it up.
But Castellano he was diabetic. He was a big guy. I mean, he was probably 300 pounds easily, right?
Right, easily.
And he was a tall guy. He was
tall guy too, yeah.
He was just a real big guy, and he was diabetic, and he got to the point where he was impotent. So he got a penile implant put in so that he could actually enjoy his life with his maid. So eventually his wife left him, and he was with the maid. And
of course, Billy, that was a big topic of discussion on the tapes with Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti. They were laughing about it, and Castellanos, they're making a joke out of him.
And so that they knew if Castellano got a hold of that and heard what they were saying about him, that would have been the end of them. He would have had them killed first.
Yeah. Plus, they're implicating him in drug business that he's supposedly outlawed.
And who knows what would have been more harmful, the fact that they were talking about that, or the fact they were talking about his penile implant.
Who knows, Billy? But anyway, everything is going wrong for Castellano, and he's making mistakes everywhere at this point. But the only thing keeping them alive is really at this point Anelie Della Croce, because his health's not good, but he does not want to leave a war. So he's keeping John Gotti at bay. And Castellanos talking about he's going to break up the Gotti crew at this point. And he's going to split them all up and put them in maybe even different families, move them around. And this is where John Gotti's street sense kicks in, Billy, because say whatever you want about the man. Don't be fooled by the suits and the fancy haircuts. This guy, he was a street guy. He was a tough guy. He'd throw down in the streets with somebody. Right. And his street sense kicked in where he says, I got to get rid of Pa. So what he starts doing is he sends his buddy Angelo Ruggiero to see some of the other capos and captains, and he sends him to talk to Sammy the Bull Gravano. And this is the thing, Bill. Gravano is in like you said, the Gambino family's so big. Gravano and Gotti were never that close.
Right.
They were in different factions of the family, basically, and they didn't have a lot of contact at this point. So Ruggiero reaches out to Gravano, and Gravano goes back to Frank DiCico.
Yeah.
And Gotti also put feelers out to Jimmy Brown Failla, was another captain in the family. And what Gotti's doing here is he's trying to cement control to take over. And did you want to talk a little bit about what Gravano said on his podcast about this, Bill? Because
yeah. So if you've never heard Sammy Gravano's podcast, Sammy the Bull, it's called Our Thing. And it's, Shauna, we talked about this, right? You have to be careful about what he says because there's a lot of things that he may not remember it right. He may be trying to protect himself.
But Bill, he is a great storyteller.
He is a fantastic storyteller. And they play, it's really well produced. They play music behind it that really builds the tension as he's talking. And the story he tells about this is that Ruggiero came to him and said, John, as Sammy the Bull says, they made an appointment, which means basically it's a meet, it's a sit down. And so Ruggiero comes to Sammy the Bull, and he says, John sent me to tell you that we want to take out Big Paul. And Sammy says, John sent you. He said, yeah. He said, where's John? He said, oh, he's got things going on. He says, well, you're telling me that John Gotti wants to whack out the boss of all bosses, and he doesn't even himself come to me to say, to ask me this?
Right.
He sends you? And Ruggiero says, yeah. He said, all right. He said, let me tell you what I'm going to do, Angelo. I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to go see Frankie DiCico. And at that point, what was DiCico's title?
At that point, Bill, he's a captain, but he's a rising captain, Bill. Like honestly, Bill, at some point, like if he doesn't get blown up in a car bomb later on, he should have been boss, Bill. I mean, he could have been boss of that family. I mean, he was rising. He was that much of a rising star in the family.
So Gravano says, I'm going to drive to Frankie DiCico's house. and I'm going to tell him exactly what you just said to me. And Ruggiero says, okay, do that. So he does. He goes, he says to Frankie, he says, Angelo came to see me. He wants to whack out Paul. And he's expecting Frankie DiCico to say, we got to get rid of these guys. We can't have this. But he doesn't. DiCico says, let me think about this. We'll talk about it. We have to come up with a plan. And at that point, Sammy Gravano starts thinking, all right, well, then this is a little bit more of a popular idea than I thought it was going to be. And so word starts to not necessarily spread, but it starts to get a little bit more support behind it. And this was early 85, I think, Sean. This was much
early 85.
Yeah. And then at that point, they start formulating. So Sammy the Bull and Frankie DiCico go back and forth. And what they decide is they say, okay, what we're going to do is we'll take out Paul, because otherwise he's going to kill John and his whole crew. He says, we'll take out Paul. And then Frankie DiCico says something interesting. He said, I can't be the boss. I can't be the boss because I know that John Gotti will never be my underboss. He'll try to kill me. It's not going to work out. He said, what we need to do is make John the boss and I'll be the underboss. And you and I, Sammy, will control everything from the shadows.
Kind of reminds you of Tony and Uncle Junior.
Exactly. They put him in position to take the heat from the feds. They put him in position because they knew his ego. Gravano said his ego is as big as the Empire State Building. He'll never be satisfied with being number two. He's got to be number one. So there is a common, I guess, misconception out there, Sean, that this was all Gotti's idea, that he planned this whole thing, that he wanted to be the boss from the beginning, which may be true, but it didn't necessarily happen that way.
No, and I think, Bill, what you see here is the genius, I mean, the evil genius of Frankie DiCico. I mean, he's seen, like his options. He's weighing his options here. He could either, side with Paul and go to war with Gotti and his crew, and again, he's thinking, he's like, in his mind, he's like, he wants to be the boss, whether he has the title or not. He wants to be in control.
Right.
And he's weighing his option. His best option at that point is he knows John wants that title.
Yeah.
And he's right, though, Bill. Like, Gotti would have never been the underboss for DiCico. And at this point, Bill, we have to mention Gotti's only an acting captain.
Right.
He's not even an official captain of his crew.
Right.
So this move by Gotti, I mean, he's got big ones, Bill. Yeah. I mean, he really does, to make this move that he's doing. And I think DiCico, his ambition, like, he really sees what Gotti's doing here. And he's like, it's kind of more, it makes more sense to him to side with John, at least for that point, rather than go to war with him.
Yep.
Well, because Gotti still has his crew, Bill. He's still got his brothers. He's still got Angelo Ruggiero. He's still got a lot of guys that are loyal to him. And it doesn't make sense for DiCico to go to war.
Right.
With another young upcoming Turk. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so then as 85 progresses, they really become suspicious that Paul is going to find out what their plan is. And they go to the mattresses at some point. So Gravano and Frankie DiCico, they're living in some guy's basement because they were afraid to show up at places where they normally hang out, because they think Big Paul is going to find out what they're planning. And
the thing is, Bill, Big Paul is so disconnected from the streets. He doesn't have any idea this is going on. And it's like, it just shows you the problems with this guy as boss.
Now, the reason that they waited, Sean, is because they didn't want to do this while Dela Croce was still alive. They respected Neil Dela Croce, even though he was at the point where he was dying. He really didn't have any power anymore. He wasn't, he was barely able to talk, but they respected him so much that they waited until after he died. And then once he died, what I guess they would consider the last straw was Castellano didn't even go to the wake.
That was totally disrespectful, Bill.
He was afraid that the FBI was going to be there. He was already on trial. He didn't want to make a show of anything. And that was the excuse that he used for not going to the wake. So that was it. That happened. I believe Neil Delacroce died December 2nd of 85. And then it didn't take long after that. They decided what they were going to do. Actually, it was Frankie DiCico who came up with the whole plan to carry out the hit. And I don't know, Sean, do you want to go into that?
Yeah, we'll go into that, Bill. And you know what? Let's mention another guy another rising soldier in the family that they reached out to was Robert DiBernardo. They called him DB.
Right. Yep.
He ran all the porno in Brooklyn and a lot of throughout the 5 boroughs. And he was an important soldier too. And he was close to Paul, and they reached out to him and he turned. So right now, at this point, Castellano really doesn't have many allies.
None.
He's got
really, Tommy Bellotti, who's his bodyguard and close associate. I don't even, was he considered?
Well, here's what happened, Bill. He made Bellotti underboss after Delacroce died.
Okay, right.
Now, that's a slap in the face to John Gotti, because John Gotti hated Bellotti, hated him.
Yep.
And to make him underboss, and he really never had any skills. He was just a loan shark, Bill. He never had any skills to be a underboss of a family.
Right.
And the other ally he had was Nino Gaggi, but he was under indictment. He really couldn't do nothing. He was wrapped up in the Roy DeMeo stolen car ring thing. And Castellano's really out there, just him and Bellotti at this point. So what happens is they set up the Chico sets up the meeting, okay? And he sets up the meeting with Big Paul Castellano at Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown, right in the heart of Manhattan, Bill.
Yep.
You know, and
couldn't get any more New York than
no.
where they were.
and this, me and you talked about this, Bill. You know, the 2 most infamous hits are probably, you know, the Castellano hit and the Jimmy Hoffa disappearance, and they couldn't be more different.
Right. Because
Hoffa had to be so quiet, had to be just taken out of the picture and disappear.
Yeah.
Where Gotti wanted this out in the open. He wanted everybody to know what happened, and he wanted a big show.
And Sean, if you've ever walked on the sidewalk in Manhattan a week and a half, 2 weeks before Christmas, it's jammed. You barely move around. It is so jam packed. And where they were was no exception. And this was December 16th. So we're talking less than 2 weeks before Christmas.
Bill, it's amazing nobody else got hit.
There were thousands of people that were literally witnesses to this. So
unbelievable.
Talk about
so what happens now, DiCico sets the meeting up and Gotti puts the hit team in place. And what they have is it was 5:30, Bill. So you're right in a, you know,
rush hour,
Bill.
Yep.
So the hit team included Sal Scala, Vincent Artuso, Eddie Lino, John Carniglia. They waited at the restaurant entrance, okay? And then the backup shooters were Dominic Pizzona, Angelo Ruggiero, and Tony DeRoche Rapino. Yeah. And now the interesting thing, Bill, is that they all dressed the same. And from what I heard, this was a plan that Jimmy Coon and the Westies came up with. Now, I can't confirm that, but this is what I heard. And the idea was they all wear these big Russian hats and the coats, and they would all, and the witnesses would not remember what their faces looked like. They would remember what they were wearing.
Right.
And it worked to perfection, Bill.
Yep.
So what happens is Castellano and Bellotti are driving in his big Lincoln Town Car, and they're pulling up to the restaurant. Castellano went, I think he went to his lawyers. He was handing out Christmas presents to the secretaries and stuff. And he pulls up, and now John Gotti and Sammy Gravano are parked in a car on the street.
Right.
And Castellano's limo pulls up. And Bill, you want to talk about what Sammy said on his podcast?
Yeah. So the way that they were situated, John was driving the car. John was sitting in the driver's seat. They were parked. So John's sitting in the driver's seat. Sammy's sitting in the passenger side. And Castellano's town car pulls up literally right next to them. Sammy turns his head, and there's Tommy Bellotti 5 feet away. So what Sammy said was, he says to John, if they see us, they're going to start shooting because they know what's going. They know that this is a setup. So Sammy grabs his gun. He says, if they see us and go for their guns, I'm just going to start blasting. So Sammy's looking, and he realizes that Bilotti is looking, Castellano showing Tommy Bilotti something. They had their sun visors down, and they're both sitting in the front seat of this town car, and Castellano showing him a picture of something. I forget exactly what he said it was. So they weren't paying attention. They had no idea that John and Sammy were there. So they continue driving. It wasn't that far down the street. So they pull up in front of Sparks. It was the only place where they could have parked.
Right.
There was no other parking spot available. So they parked right in front. And that's where where it went down.
Here's the other problem, Bill, is Castellano and Bilotti, neither one of them were packing. Neither one of them had a weapon on them. I mean, this is how disconnected.
This was just going to be a dinner, right?
Right. But this is how disconnected Castellano is from the street, Bill. Like he has to, at some point, he has to know that Gotti's going to try something. And here he is with his bodyguard and underboss, and he's not carrying a weapon.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
And part of the setup too, Sean, was so Frankie DiCico was the one who set this meeting. He called Castellano. He said, I need to talk to you. We need to talk about what's going on. But of course, he was part of the set. He knew what was, right. This was his idea, essentially, his brainchild. So he's in the restaurant with
Tommy Gambino,
with Gambino, and also
which is Paul's nephew and Carlo's son.
Right.
But he's not part of the plan. They didn't include him on this.
And what they were going to do was they were going to have Castellano essentially was going to make amends for not showing up at the wake for Diplomat. Right. So what Sammy said to DiCico was, if they hear the shots going on out there, if these guys hear what's going on, they hear the commotion and they start to get up, he said, you show them the gun. He said, you have a gun on you. You show them the gun. And if you listen to Sammy's podcast, he says that a lot. I showed him the gun. I showed him just to make sure, I've got a gun. And, if anything goes wrong here, I'm going to use it. So he said that to DiCico. He said, you show them the gun. And I guess what happened was they did. They got up. They got very nervous. DiCico said, just relax. He shows them the gun. He says, just relax. This will all be over in a minute. And then eventually they all got up and they walked out of the restaurant, unbeknownst to anybody, the cops or anybody. But all right. So we didn't even talk about the actual hit yet. So
what happened is outside now, the car pulls up and Paul starts to get out, and Bilotti's getting out to open the door for Paul. And Tony DeRoach Rapino starts unloading on Bilotti. Okay. And John Carniglia, the first to hit Castellano. And bullets are flying everywhere, Bill. And one of the gunmen, Vinny Artuso, his gun jammed. And Sammy talked about this on his podcast, Bill, that it was real important for Artuso to report that immediately.
Right.
So the others didn't find out and think that he backed out at the last second, and it chickened out. So they had to report that. But they started loading, and it's over in a matter of seconds, Bill.
Right. Yep. And there's a lot of screaming and people, running, and it's just tons of commotion.
And nobody else is hit, Bill.
Right.
There's bystanders everywhere, and nobody else is hit. And again, the witnesses don't recognize any of the faces. They're just worried about what the people are dressed, what the hitmen were dressed like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that plan worked to perfection. And then John and Sammy pull up, and they look down and they see Paul's body there. And I think John made a comment, he's dead.
They didn't. They saw Bilotti. They didn't see Paul.
Okay, you're right. You're right. They saw Bilotti.
Right. Paul was on the other side.
He's on the other side by the entrance. Right.
So what happened was, after they pull away, as Gravano turns on the radio, he puts on 880, which is a news station in New York, and they're already talking about it. This is minutes after this happened. And this is not, we're talking about 1985 here.
Right.
This is way before the internet, way before you got notifications the second after something happened. I mean, it literally, if something would happen at 5 o'clock, it would sometimes take until 11 o'clock that night before anybody would know about it. It'd be on the news that night.
I just think, Bill, the timing of it, to happen right before Christmas and the location, right in the heart of Midtown and rush hour. I mean, it was just a madness to try to pull this off at that time, at that place was just, I got to say it again. I mean, Gotti had big ones and
Sure
so
did.
did DiCico, and DiCico, and like you said, DiCico planned a lot of this. A lot of the planning was his brainchild.
Right. Yeah. And again, they did it on purpose. They did it this way because they wanted people to know. They wanted everybody to know what they were doing, who they were doing it to. And it took balls, but it also sent a message to everybody else.
Right.
To say, okay, guess who's in charge now, boys?
But the problem with that is, Billy, they never reached out to the other families. They, according to Gravano, they made, a little bit of overtures to some lower level, even captains or something, but the heads of the 5 family, the other 4 never approved this.
Right.
And they never even reached out to anybody. So, but the problem is, Bill, they're all in jail. They're all not in jail, but they were under investigation with the commission trial.
Right.
But they all had their own problems.
But they were ready for war, though, Sean. They were ready to go to war over this, and I think that's one of the big things, one of the big stories kind of in the aftermath of this, because Sammy the Bull talks about this on his podcast. They went back to the mattresses. They expected to be hunkered down for a long time. And when they started hearing that people weren't all that upset about this murder, that's when they started coming out of hiding and things started happening. And eventually they would name, John the boss.
Right. 2 weeks later really is when they named them the boss. But the problem is, Bill, the only guy that had a problem with this was Vincent the Chin Gigante. And
right. Yep.
Gigante was the real boss of the Genovese family. Tony Salerno was like the front boss, but he was a very powerful front boss. It wasn't like Uncle Junior situation. But Fat Tony was under indictment where Gigante wasn't. And Gigante would come to infamy when he'd be walking around Greenwich Village there with his robe, pretending he's crazy. They call him the Odd Father.
Yeah.
But
if you don't know about Vincent Gigante, you have to either watch a documentary about him. What books are there about him, Sean? I don't even know. You
know what, Bill? There's a few, but there's nothing that's that spectacular on him. I mean, he's been one that he's kind of there's not a lot of great information on him, Bill, because remember, like a lot of people for a long time thought Fat Tony was the boss.
Right.
And Gigante wouldn't even let his name. His people couldn't even speak his name, Bill. They would point to their chin when they were talking about him.
Right.
So his name wasn't even picked up on any bugs. There was the one bug on Fat Tony where somebody was complaining to him, and Fat Tony said, "You know what? I'm sick of this. You go to the boss and complain." And that's when the FBI realized, Fat Tony might not be the boss here. But the thing is, the FBI wanted to look the other way on that, Bill, because they already had Fat Tony under indictment for their commission trial.
Right.
And they didn't want this to come out that Fat Tony's not the actual boss, but what happens is Gigante's upset. And I don't think he was upset because he was friendly with Castellano. I don't think he gave a damn about Castellano. He was upset that they didn't reach the other families because you need an okay from the other 4 bosses to take out a commission boss.
Right. Yep.
So what happens is Castellano orders Frank DiCico assassinated. Now, a lot of people think that he was targeting Gotti. He was targeting DiCico from everything I read on the FBI wiretaps, and they blow him up in a car bomb. And DiCico, and the thing is, because Gigante's smart enough to realize DiCico was the real brains behind a lot of this, Bill. And he was the guy that set Paul up.
Right. Yep.
So that's why Gigante went after him. And we're not going to get into a lot of Gotti's reign. That's a whole other episode, Bill.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Because there's so much to talk about, with his reign. But just what an unbelievable hit to do this at the timing they did in the heart of Manhattan. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And this is I remember I was just a kid, Bill, but I remember this, watching this on TV unfolding. And it was just incredible, Bill.
Yeah.
It was all over the news. Like you said, within minutes, it was all over.
And the other thing is with this hit, Sean, it kind of, remember how in the episode we did on the Montreal screw job in wrestling, we kind of said that was sort of the turning point. It's kind of the beginning of the end of WCW. this was kind of the beginning of the
Yes, it was.
of New York, crime, the New York.
The Five Families. This was the beginning of the end, Bill. It was. I mean, there's always going to be, organized crime in New York, but it's never going to be the level it was. This was the beginning of the end, basically.
Yeah, it really was.
We'll talk about that. We'll go into more detail on that when we do a whole episode on John Gotti, because frankly, he, to me, there's the three most infamous crime figures, bosses in organized crime in America the last, 100 years is Al Capone, Whitey Bulger, and John Gotti.
Yeah.
And we'll have to do a whole episode.
None of their reigns were that long. It was.
Well, Bulger's was.
Well, Bulger, right.
But Bulger had help from the FBI. We'll talk about that. But but you're right. Capone was a short reign. It was only like 6 years, 7 years, and Gotti was only about 5 years.
Right.
But the thing is, they're all public. Now, Bulger was a little public too, but when he really came into his own, when he started, when he wins the lottery, that's when his downfall was. He got too much over the top,
Right. Yeah.
But it's like, this was just an incredible hit, Billy. And, the next thing we got to talk about, is there anything else you want to talk about before we get into the movie? Because
let's talk about the movie, because I really want to talk about that.
So to me, Bill, when you talk about mob movies, you talk obviously The Godfather, Goodfellas, but to me, one of the most actually the most realistic movie is the HBO 1996, I believe, Gotti movie.
Yeah, not the Travolta.
No, not that disaster.
I didn't even see that, Sean, to be honest with you.
Bill, I watched about 15 minutes of it, and I was hoping to get that 15 minutes back. It was awful, Bill. Everything the critics said about it was true.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, this was and it's difficult you really have to look to find this movie, because it's not, I don't believe it's on any streaming service. It is on YouTube. So if you look on YouTube, if you type in Gotti TV movie 1996,
you'll get it on YouTube.
You'll find it. But it's not on any stream. It really is to me. It's one of the best mob movies ever made.
It is. Now there was another one, Bill, with Tom Sizemore. It was a made-for-TV movie. He played Gotti.
Yeah,
that was okay.
I don't remember it. I probably saw that when it came out. I really don't remember it though, Sean.
Yeah, it was okay, Bill. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't. This was a powerhouse movie, and what made it so great is the acting, Bill, was tremendous. And three actors stand out to me. Like the whole cast is tremendous, but three actors stand out. Armin Asante playing John Gotti he played Gotti better than Gotti could have.
Yeah, it was perfect.
He had the mannerisms down. Armin Asante was just tremendous, and Anthony Quinn playing Neely Delacroce.
Yep.
Amazing, Bill.
Amazing.
And the other guy is a favorite of mine, a longtime favorite of mine, is William Forsythe playing Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Yeah.
That guy, if I was making a movie, Bill, any bad guy in the movie, I would have him cast as.
He played such a great bad guy. He was in, and it's amazing. I couldn't believe it was the same guy. He was in one of the Steven Seagal movies.
Yeah, he was in Out for Justice, was it?
Right, and he played the Richie, who was a big fat, organized crime guy. And then in this movie, he doesn't look like that at all. He looks like Sammy the Bull. He's a chameleon. He also played Al Capone in an Untouchable series in the 90s.
That's
right. Yep, that's right.
And he was in the Dick Tracy movie with Al Pacino. He's in a lot of things, Bill. He was in Halloween, the zombie Halloween movie. He's just a tremendous actor. But those three guys really stand out.
Yep.
Their performance was just spot on, perfect.
Yeah, they were great.
And there's a couple things I can nitpick, like, they kind of like they didn't portray the Westies accurately. The one guy that Gotti whacked to make his bones, that guy wasn't a Westie at all, not even connected to them at all. And they portrayed him as a Westie. There was a couple other things like I think a lot of the things they kind of steered it like everything on Sammy and not a lot on John, where I don't know if that's totally accurate. Like I know Sammy was doing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He was running things a lot behind John's back, but I just don't know if it was to the level that they had in the movie. But that's just nitpicking, Bill. This is really one of the most accurate portrayals of
they
gangsters I've
definitely
ever seen.
they definitely took some dramatic liberties with this. I mean, it does portray Sammy and John to be a lot closer than I think they really were.
Right.
It portrays John as kind of the mastermind behind the whole murder, and he really, as we talked about, it was really Frankie DiCico and
Right.
And then
Bill, one other thing that they mentioned was in the movie it's portrayed that Sammy the Bull takes out his own brother-in-law, and that he was totally behind that, and that's not true. He didn't want to do that. It was Castellano that ordered his brother-in-law Nick Shabetta to be whacked, and Castellano kind of forced Sammy to do that, and that's where Sammy kind of turned on Castellano.
Yeah.
Where he didn't trust him anymore.
Right. And there was another one, and I think we've talked about before, Sean, when Gotti's one of Gotti's sons was killed. It was an accident. He was a kid, and he was riding his bike in the neighborhood.
Frank Gotti,
and a car comes out of nowhere. As the next door neighbor, car comes out of nowhere, doesn't see him, and hits him and kills him. And the way that they portray it in the movie is that Sammy goes after this guy for revenge and kills him. But I don't think that's what actually happened. And I can't remember.
That's definitely not what happened, Bill. What happened was Gotti and his wife went away to Florida for a vacation. They said they had to get away. And then the neighbor, John Favar was his name.
Right.
He disappeared.
Yeah.
And the FBI said that they had informants that told them that Gotti had the guy killed and cut up with a chainsaw. So Sammy really didn't have anything to do with that. But you're right. The movie portrayed it that it was all Sammy. That John actually says in the movie, says, no, it was just an accident. Don't do nothing.
Right.
So there was some things, Bill, but Bill, Hollywood's always going to take liberties.
Sure.
They're always going to.
But those things aside, Sean, I mean, this was just a fantastic movie. And the other thing is there were, and it connects to the Sopranos. They actually, in a couple of ways. Number one, there were a lot of actors in this movie that went on to star in the Sopranos. Vincent Pastore, who would play Big Pussy in the Sopranos, Tony Sirico, who played Paulie Walnuts, Dominic Chianese, who of course played Uncle Junior, Frank Vincent, who would be on Sopranos in later seasons. Vince Curatola, if you blink, you miss him, but he's in this. He's Johnny Sack in the Sopranos, but he's in the movie very, very briefly. And also Frank Pellegrino, Sean, who we forgot to mention when we were talking about this yesterday. He plays an FBI agent, and actually in both. He plays an FBI agent in the movie, and
you're right, he does
in the Sopranos.
Yeah.
There was a story about this. I forget the magazine that it was in. I think it was in like Hollywood Report or something like that, where they talked about this movie, the success of Gotti, spurring them on really to create the Sopranos, because it was only a few years later when the Sopranos came out. So without this movie, there may not have been a Sopranos, Sean.
No, that's incredible, Bill. And it's we were talking too about some of these actors I'm surprised weren't in Sopranos, like the guy that played Frankie DiCico in this movie.
Yeah.
What did you say his name was?
Miranda, yeah.
Yeah, I remember him from a great series in the 80s, Wise Guy. Yeah. One of my favorites when I was a kid. But he's a great actor. I'm surprised he didn't end up there. And I'm surprised Armin Asante didn't end up at some point in the Sopranos.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe he was too big of a name. They didn't want to really take away. I don't know, Bill.
Yeah, maybe. Interesting.
But, yeah, you're right, though. It's just the whole movie, Bill, is just absolutely tremendous.
Yeah.
There's so many good lines. Anthony Quinn just knocks it out of the park.
He's great. And of course, his line, the last line that he says in the movie, which, when people ask me, what do you think your last words will be? I always say this. He says, this whole fucking thing lasts only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he dies.
Yeah, he was great. He was really great. I mean, that scene that you talked about earlier where, he walked in with the 2 zips.
Yeah.
And he told Gotti, hey, this could have went the other way.
Right.
And to sit down. and we could end up whacking you. You know,
Right.
but there, another great is the guy that played Uncle Junior in The Sopranos. He played Joe and Gallo. That was a consigliere that was kind of retired, but these guys never retire, Bill.
Right. Right.
And he has a sit down he has a talk with John Gotti about his Too Public, and that was just a great scene.
Yeah.
Where he's telling him, duck, he says.
Right.
The cameras come out, he said, duck.
And you can, there's a lot of it's funny because Vincent Pastore and Tony Sirico have some scenes together, and you just you see the chemistry between them, and of course they end up having great chemistry in The Sopranos also as Big Pussy.
Pastore talked a lot about Asante, like how good Asante was, like that scene where Ruggiero's real sick and they're eating cannolis, and he said that Asante ad-libbed that whole thing.
Yeah.
Like Asante is just a tremendous actor.
Oh, he's so good.
He is top level.
Yep.
And just anybody has not seen this movie, if you want an accurate portrayal of what happened, you got to see this movie.
And Sean, we've had a couple guests on lately that have done some quotes, some readings. I'm gonna take a liberty here to do a passage from this movie. And I gotta get into character here, Sean. So hang on a second.
Go for it, buddy.
Let me do this. All right. So I'm playing John Gotti, and I'm gonna do two, Sean. This is, you get two for the price of one here. I'm gonna do John Gotti. I'm gonna do Frank Locascio. Okay. So the other voice you hear, the high pitched voice, is gonna be Frankie Locascio. All right, here we go. Here's Gotti. Makes you think about the people in your life. And when I think of Neil. If he were here right now, what would he say? He'd say, John, what's it about? What's life about? If you don't go through it as a man's man. He'd say, suck it up. Take the fall, do the time. That made you who you are. That makes you what you are. How long have we been around this thing of ours? This Cosa Nostra? 120 years. What's it about? It's about the rules, parameters. You take the beating for a friend. You don't run. You don't lay down. You don't betray who you are, what you are. Self-esteem. Self-esteem is basic. You get that from the street. You learn that on the street. You got to remember Angie. I love this guy. Loved him. But he was stupid. He always wanted that goddamn dope money. He never rolled. You know that? He never rolled. My brother Gene, Joey the Mig, they're doing 1,000 years now. Why? That's the rule. You don't break. You don't rag. Gives you a bit of power, right? Not the kind of power these feds have, God forbid. We pull the chain in public. Fucking dress better than they do. They take it personal like it's a fucking vendetta. They're supposed to be better than the rest of us, right? They just wanted me to be something I wasn't even born to be. Humble. They wanted you to be humble. Yeah. So you humbled me. So what you got? You got a war. You got a global war. You got your Chinese, Dominicans, Asians, Russians, Colombians, Jamaicans. What are they doing? They desecrate the nation. You got your variable fucking snowstorms, or cocaine, smack, or whatever they shove in their veins. There's no rules. There's no parameters. There's no feelings. There's no feelings for this country. Anarchy. You got anarchy. So, 5-10 years from now, they're going to wish there was American Cosa Nostra. 5-10 years from now, they're going to miss John Gotti.
I'll tell you what, Billy, that was awesome. That was awesome, brother.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah, good. Everybody get out and see this movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, YouTube, you got to find it. We'll put the link. We'll actually put the link in the description, so everybody can get to it.
That was great, though, Billy. You earned your price there, pal.
What do you think? Academy Award? What?
I don't know, but I don't know if it was Armin Asante, but it was good, buddy.
Close, close.
That's big shoes you're filling there, pal.
That's true. Very
but
true.
That was good. That was really good.
All right, Sean. Well, let's wrap it up. I know we got.
We went overboard on this one, buddy, but it was a big subject and just a great topic to discuss. And it was just what an amazing time in history, Bill. I mean, like you said, it was the beginning and the end, Bill.
Yeah.
And again, we're not glorifying these guys because I know there's going to be pushback where, I always get it, Bill. I always get it that I'm glorifying them. And not glorifying these guys. We know exactly who they are.
They're criminals. They're killers.
Criminals.
They're maniacs. They're
Yeah.
absolute, maniacs. But it's a part of our American history. It really is.
Exactly.
And at some point, maybe we'll even get into how the FBI, how the state of New York and the FBI kind of got together and brought these guys down. We'll talk about RICO at some point, because there's a lot to get into there. And of course,
and RICO bill was by a guy that we've talked about, Robert Blakey, who was on the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He was the chairman.
Right.
And actually the story, Bill, there was a conference that was they were given some kind of dedication to Blakey on December 16, 1985. And a pile of FBI agents were at this to celebrate with Blakey. And when this hit went down, all their pagers went off.
Yeah.
The entire conference room, Bill, all the pagers are going off.
I remember that story. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
And then also, Rudy Giuliani was a big part of taking down the New York organized crime. So yeah, we'll get into it one day. We'll definitely do a show on that.
All right, Billy, this was a good one, pal.
Was good. So don't forget the website, that'senoughoutofyou.com. Links there to our Patreon, links to the show. It's got blogs, everything you need for our show is there.
And Bill, your phone is probably going to be blowing up with producers calling you, buddy.
I'll have to change.
You're going to be getting acting job offers everywhere, buddy.
I can't wait. I'll have to change my number so it doesn't. All right, Sean.
All right, brother. That's enough out of you.
Enough out of you. All right, man. Take care.
Good night, everybody.